Well, good evening, and welcome to the Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, a 7-part series celebrating the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, Care for Our Common Home. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Harp Center for Catholic Thought and Culture, the University of San Diego's Office of Ministry, the Strategic Pathway Care for Our Common Home, and the Department of Environmental Sciences. We welcome all of you this evening. I am Jeffrey Burns. I'm the director of the Harp Center for Catholic Thought and Culture. To enhance your viewing this evening, you may want to leave your view on a speaker view, so you'll have a better view of Dr. Ramanathan, and you will be muted. At the end of Dr. Ramanathan's presentation, we will have questions and answers. We will ask you to submit your questions through the chat room, and then we will unmute you and invite you to ask your questions directly to Dr. Ramanathan. So we will now have an introduction to the series and to our speaker tonight from our president, Dr. James Harris.
Hello, my name is Jim Harris, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the University of San Diego. Welcome. Today it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural session of Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, a series of discussions celebrating and exploring Pope Francis's landmark open letter to the world entitled Laudato Si. Released 5 years ago, Laudato Si spoke to all of humanity and addressed a diversity of concerns germane to most educational institutions' missions, to educate students for responsible global citizenship. Calling our attention to the alarming state of the planet and the urgent need for collective action to address this existential threat, Pope Francis challenged all of us to undergo an ecological conversion. He made it clear that climate change is real and is happening now, that the more disadvantaged among us are disproportionately affected, and that we must work together across all disciplines to face humanity's urgent challenges. At USD, we took this call to ecological conversion to heart. Care for our common home, with a focus on environmental impacts and social justice, is one of our key strategic pathways, already producing significant results and accolades as we continue to lead boldly with our sustainable practices on campus. We will continue to set the standard as we respond to Pope Francis's call to solidarity and commitment to responsible stewardship. In this series, drawing on experts from both on and off campus, we will explore the depths of the challenge before us to properly care for our common home. And we will conclude with a conversation on how the USD community can deepen our commitment and expand our practices to heal our broken planet. I thank you for being here today, signaling your continued commitment to sustainability, solving humanity's urgent challenges, and the solidarity needed to make the world a better place now and for future generations. I want to encourage you to join us for as much of Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor as you can, spreading the word of this series, which, like Pope Francis's letter, is open and addressed to all. We are especially privileged today to welcome Professor V Ram Ramanathan, who has the exalted and unofficial title of the Pope's Climate Scientist. Welcome, Ram. Dr. Michel Boudrias, Associate Professor of Environmental and Ocean Sciences and Director of the Care for Our Common Home pathway here at USD, will now introduce our esteemed guest speaker.
Well, thank you, President Harris, for welcoming all of us, opening up this series that we are very excited and proud to present. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Ramanathan. There's so many things I can say. I'm going to try to keep this short so you don't hear as much from me, but much more from Dr. Ramanathan. He has quite an exalted and incredible background. He is a professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UCSD. I'm a proud alum of SIO, so that gives us another connection. He is the Edward Freeman Endowed Residential Chair for Climate Sustainability. He's a council member for the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences. He is the chair and editor of Bending the Curve, Climate Change Solutions and the co-chair of the California Collaborative for Climate Change Solutions. There are four things I want to say about Dr. Ramanathan before I turn the floor over to him. First, he's a world-renowned climatologist. He has done a tremendous work in looking at CFCs in the atmosphere from many decades ago, early on looking at the impacts of air pollution, really focusing a lot on clean air, bringing in all kinds of great technologies, and has continued this work about air pollution and that connections to climate change over his time. But for this talk and for this series, I think there are three other really important components. First, he's working on Project Surya with his daughters, looking at the impacts, the health and climate change impacts of cooking with solid biomass, which to me brings the connection between science and social justice, and science and working with the disadvantaged communities that are living on this planet. Secondly, clearly as the scientific advisor to Pope Francis, as a UN climate champion, as someone who represented the Vatican as one of the people at the big COP meetings over time, he brings that connection very strongly to this. And finally, and something that I think is really great, is that many times top-notch researchers focus on their research, but Dr. Ramanathan is truly passionate about teaching and the communication of climate change. And the fact that he works with Bending the Curve and teaching about climate change is another great perspective that we really need to thank him for, and to see how this connects so well to what we try to do at USD. So without further ado, Dr. Ramanathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm honored to be here, particularly on this 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. I want to congratulate and thank University of San Diego for thinking about this. And Laudato Si is the document we need to guide us through this climate crisis. So if I can share, let me try to share my screen. Can you see the full screen? Thank you. So let me go to my first slide. I just want to mention, without any reservations, that one of the best climate change document that I have read, and I was honored to participate in this, which connects climate change to human conditions. Just that phrase, if you ask me to choose from that 50+ page document, just one phrase, it would be that cry of the earth should be heard with the cry of the poor. I joined, I was elected to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in 2004, about 15 years ago, by Pope John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II. I didn't know much about the Pontifical Academy of Science. So when I went to the first meeting, I was sort of worried, thinking they'll find out I'm not a Catholic and throw me out of the academy. And it was 5 years into the academy, I realized that this is one of the most unique science academy, to the extent that it's under a religious institution, but the academy members are chosen not for their religious institution or religious affiliation, but more for scientific contributions. So here it is, 80 scientists around the world, all from different religions. Of course, there are many Catholics, advising the head of the Catholic Church on matters of science. And I'll talk to you about my role in Laudato Si, but this email was sent about 2 weeks ago. That's when I realized my role in the academy. Last week, Professor Paul Crutzen, who coined the phrase Anthropocene, and my very, very close and dear friend, passed away. And he was a Nobel laureate and one of the most creative work in protecting the environment. And in reply to a reporter who asked about Paul Crutzen's role in Laudato Si, the Chancellor of the Academy, Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrando, wrote this about my role with the Pope, and I was really touched by that recognition. So I have spent about, as my introduction, Michel said, 50 years observing the planet. I started in 1970 when I immigrated from India to this country. I was at that time studying the climate of Mars and Venus planets. So what I've learned since then, I have observed the climate of Earth from satellites, aircraft, space, ships, etc. Everything we see around us is in a delicate balance to protect our well-being on this planet. So much so, I'll give you some examples. Our planet is indeed in a so-called Goldilocks zone, with just the right temperature for us to enjoy the world around us. It has the right temperature for water to exist in vapor phase, liquid and solid, etc. The second thing I've learned, all from data, everything we see, the ecosystem, the natural system, and the living parts of the planet is connected. Any change, however small, in any corner of the Earth is felt by the entire ecosystem, all plants, all animals. I'll give you some examples of that. So the lesson I learned, in part because of my involvement with the church, is that we have to live on this planet with the spiritual devotion, love, and admiration for all of creation. Once we have that devotion, the solutions will present itself. And I'll give you some examples of that. So let me start with, what do I mean the planet is in a Goldilocks zone? I'm showing you the 4 inner planets, Mercury on the left-hand side, then Venus, Earth, and Mars. Look at the Mercury has no atmosphere, so it's just clearly not livable. Look at Venus, super hot. Why is that? Because it has 100,000 times more carbon dioxide, most powerful greenhouse planet. And on Earth at 15 degrees Celsius, that's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So, beautiful planet, right temperature for plants, trees, animals to thrive, right temperature for clouds to form, for rain to fall on our head. And then the other extreme is Mars, too cold for life, at least now, okay? Let me give you some example. The planet's climate is determined by incoming sunlight, and the planet reflects about 30% of it back to space. This is what I measured in the 1970s with NASA scientists. If it did not reflect 30%, but just say 27%, the planet would be too hot. There won't be ice anywhere on the planet. On the other hand, if it reflected 33% instead of 30, it would be frozen. So what determines how much the planet reflects? The distribution of the clouds, the distribution of snow ice, the distribution of land, and the distribution of trees, and how much ocean. They all configured in just the right exact proportion to make this planet habitable. Imagine that. One thing out of order, if we had less clouds, it would be too hot. Okay? And so that's the thing you have to remember when I'm going to talk about the climate crisis. This is the balance which nature has been millions of years, and we have suddenly upset this. So how are we really upsetting this balance? Okay. First of all, look at the thin bluish haze. That's our atmosphere. That's how thin the atmosphere is. When you go look outside, it looks vast, and you think it's just millions of miles. No, it's a thin layer. So what happens, let's say when we drive a car, the car has hydrocarbon fuel. That's what fossil fuel is. The hydrogen in the fuel combines with the oxygen in the air when you burn it and becomes carbon dioxide. When you release that carbon dioxide, let's say we released about 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide by driving. Half of that would stay for 100 years. 20% of that would stay for thousands of years. So everything we emitted since the Industrial Revolution, say beginning around 1750 to 1800, some of that pollution is still up there and it's been accumulating. How much have we emitted so far? 2 trillion tons. And the air has still 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide. Imagine the sheer weight of it. So it's covering the planet like a blanket. And that blanket behaves just like a blanket on a cold winter night, keeps you warm, not by giving its heat, but it traps your body heat. That's exactly what this blanket does. It traps the planet's heat. And it's determined by quantum mechanics and basic physics. This is some of the things I measured directly in the 1980s. So like I said, 1 trillion of carbon dioxide. In addition to that, we have emitted 4 other super pollutants: methane, which is 90 times more potent than carbon dioxide; soot in the form of black carbon, which is 2,000 times more potent in heating the planet, and so on and so forth, okay? And we also know how much heat it has trapped. It's about 900 trillion watts of heat. Watts is the same as when you say 60-watt light bulb. That's about 70 times more than the heat we released by burning fossil fuel. So everything is huge. So I was, working on the science about 37 years ago. I got curious and I made a prediction. If our understanding of the CO2 global warming problem is real, we made a prediction we should detect it by year 2000. It was in 2001, 1,000 scientists wrote a report saying that we are seeing the human impact on the warming. So that prediction sadly came true. So what's happening? Since 5 years ago, we realized this global warming, planetary scale warming, is disturbing the weather, causing new weather extremes. In California, we are seeing it. This is a picture of the sun I took after the Valley Fire event, last September. 3 days later, the sun was red. Why is that? The particles, soot particles, which are released, took the blue and the green out, so left the sun fiery, hot, and angry. So we are seeing climate change every time you see the fire. So what's the thing which connects warming with fires? One equation. It has a death grip on everything that's happening in the planet. I put that equation, I'm not going to explain it. What it shows, evaporation of moisture from our trees, from our soil, from our body increases exponentially with temperature. So that's why things are drying out, and that's why we have spontaneous fires covering millions of acres. And California fire extent has increased by 400%, okay? On the East Coast, they're feeling it in terms of storms. Midwest, they're feeling it in terms of floods. So every American is feeling this climate crisis through extremes. We just published a study last week. It was led by Dr. Jyoti Mishra, a neuroscientist at the psychiatry division at UCSD. She found sampling 735 that were exposed to the Camp Fire. It was the most deadliest fire California experienced. Increased significantly the risk for mental disorders, PTSD, depression, anxiety. The statistics were alarming, okay? So it is affecting us personally. And in terms of globally, this is the statistics comparing the last 20 years with the previous 20 years. The number of extreme disasters increased from 4,000 to 7,400, and the cost of it is about 1.3 trillion. So climate change is happening. It has become a crisis. Many are experiencing this. Just like I made a prediction in 1980, teaming up with two colleagues at UCSD, I published this in December 2018, that the planet, which is already warmed by 1 degree Celsius as of 2015, is going to warm by another 50% and cross a major threshold, 1.5 degrees, in 10 years from now, 2030. So we have 10 years to do something about this problem. But that 1.5 degrees is going to happen, and actions now will prevent it from going too far. I'm predicting that when we hit the 1.5 degrees, I'm certain we're going to hit that 1.5 degree, 2030, give or take few years. Climate change, like COVID-19, will move into our living rooms. Okay? It's going to require global cooperation. That's where religions come in. Because emission anywhere in the planet is global warming everywhere, because the lifetime of that carbon dioxide is thousands of years, okay? So if you ask, when was the last time we experienced this hot climate? That was during an interglacial period called Eemian, about 128 to 115,000 years ago. That planet, sea surface temperature is warmer by 0.6 degrees. We exceeded in 2002. But because it's paleo reconstruction, it has a huge uncertainty. I showed you the shaded region, but we will cross even that by 2035. So we are rapidly rushing across to the cliff, beyond which we don't know what's waiting for us, okay? So let's say that in the unlikely event we continue ignoring this beyond 2030, in about 20 to 30 years from then, beyond 2050, that's what's going to happen. That's the brown areas are intensely droughts, okay? So look at the whole of California. I don't see how we can grow any agriculture. So our Goldilocks zone, which is shrinking, would really shrink, okay? And imagine all our children and grandchildren, we are just pushing them into this future. So I want to now go to the positive part, on the solutions part. I teamed up with some top experts and got the blessing of Pope Francis to organize a meeting at the Vatican. This was 2017. And we brought out a book just focusing on the health. This is teaming up with WHO, many physicians, healthcare professionals from around the world. After reviewing all the data, we concluded climate change caused by burning of fossil fuels and other human activities poses an existential threat to all human beings, Homo sapiens, and would contribute to mass extinction of species, okay? So we got to do something about it. The good thing I want to say is that it's not too late. It's still not too late. Plenty of scalable solutions are available. We have a decade to implement these solutions. But I don't want to kid anyone. You know, it's going to require enormous investments, okay? So on what authority am I claiming all this? In 2015, I led a group of 50 faculty from all 10 campuses of University of California, and we published this report called Bending the Curve. And we came with 10 solutions to the climate change problem and we put it under 6 clusters. Societal transformation is on the top of our list. Governance, markets and regulations, technology measures, and ecosystem management. Okay? And why societal transformation? Why did it go to the top of our list in terms of the cluster? Again, it was my interaction with the church and other religious institutions. So first, let me talk about what do we need to do? This is what the science tells you. We have to reduce emissions of these 4 superpollutants and bring emissions of carbon dioxide to, and we have to remove at least half of the 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide we have put into the air. That will immediately bend that warming curve. But then on the long term, to prevent the disasters beyond 2050, what I talked to you about, we have to go to zero fossil fuel, switch completely from fossil fuel to renewable energy. I want to give you an example of some of the numerous low-hanging fruits. Worldwide, we throw about 1/3 of the food into the garbage. It doesn't reach our stomach. Americans, we throw 40% of the food, produce food. Enormous amount of greenhouse gases are emitted to produce that food. And then when we throw into the landfill, it becomes methane, which is about 90 times more potent, and then warms even further. Okay, if we start a massive program to take that edible part of the food we throw and give it to the poor, feed the homeless, feed the poor, and the rest we put into biodigesters and convert to renewable fuels. It's just an unimaginably win-win solution. But of course, none of this is going to happen without societal transformation. So let me move on to that topic. I think that's where I feel religious-based institutions can have a transformational impact, okay? So I teamed up with about 25 faculty of the UC, and we created a new education protocol called Bending the Curve. And we have an open source digital textbook anyone can read. We are offering hybrid courses. We have created an online version. Soon we're going to offer it as a Coursera course for general public. And on the left-hand side, you see the image of the book. My personal aim, I'm 76, before I leave this planet, my goal is to educate 1 million climate warriors. I've so far come to a few thousand. So I need to add 3 more zeros before I leave the planet. So what is it I talked with Pope Francis? We held a meeting in 2014. I talked in that meeting about how there are 2 separate worlds. I call it the top of the world. 1 billion live with seemingly unlimited access to fossil fuels. Contrast that with the bottom 3 billion. This is a hut in the Himalayan region. I stayed in that family's as a guest house, as a guest. It's almost identical to my grandmother's kitchen. And my grandmother didn't have access to fossil fuels. Neither this woman living in 2004, it was taken 15 years ago. They are still depending on primitive technologies to meet basic energy needs. So their contribution to global warming is less than 5%. The top 1 billion contribute more than 50 to 60% of the climate pollution. And that's what I briefed to Pope Francis. At the end of the meeting, surrounding me are Nobel laureates and top experts from the world. We were supposed to brief Pope Francis inside the St. Peter's Basilica, but he was so busy today, he decided to meet us in the parking lot. So I had to reduce my 30-minute briefing to 2 minutes. So that's why I call 2 minutes parking lot pitch. I just told him about the two worlds. And Pope Francis asked in Italian, what can you do about this? So Bishop Sarando, he's one of become my closest colleague and friend, translated to me, and he said, Ram, the Holy Father is asking, what can you do about this? And I told Pope Francis, you have become the moral, spiritual leader of the world. You've gone beyond the Catholic religion. So people will listen to you. Ask them to be good stewards of the planet. And the Pope smiled and laughed, and also you can see the Archbishop Franz laughed. So when I walked back, I asked Marcelo, I was talking such a serious thing. Why were you laughing? He said, Ram, you are preaching to the Pope. Nobody does that. So because he said that's what he does. He asks people to be good stewards of the planet. I had a similar encounter with the Dalai Lama. I was on two events with him. Then I had spent some time with him when he was in the hospital. He said two things. To solve the climate change problem, you have to have compassion across borders. That was so prophetic for me because, like I said, emissions anywhere is global warming everywhere. So for our own survival, we have to make sure we make clean energy affordable to the poorest 3 billion who can't access it. Okay. And then after that event, I was in a private lunch with him, and he asked, tell me, what do you want to do? Tell me in a simple one sentence. I told him, we just have to clean up the air. He looks at me, and then in his typical way, he jokes, and then he says, tell me, how can you clean the outer environment without cleaning the inner environment? So that's when social scientists told me societal transformation has to come to the top. I had no problem accepting that. So let me conclude with two thoughts, I'll be happy to have discussion on this. Why do we really need religions to fight climate change? This is a study I wrote teaming up with the famous economist at Cambridge University. We said finding ways to develop a sustainable relationship with our planet requires ultimately also a moral revolution. Religious institutions can and should take the lead on bringing about such a new attitude towards creation, okay? That faith-based institutions have the authority and the tools to talk about ethical, moral issues, which scientists like me, we don't have those tools or even the language. So let me conclude with these questions. Can science and religion work together and contemplate on how do we deal with the pace of technological change? What's happening to our human nature that we are not thinking about how we are sending our grandchildren and generations unborn on that plane, which is going to crash, okay? What are we doing to nature and to creation? And then how do we improve the trust in science? And now this is for my scientist colleagues. How do we educate scientists on the value of religion in protecting humanity? Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to any questions or this you may have.
Thank you very much, Ron. Let's give him a hand of applause, please. And please send your questions to the chat so that I can coordinate the efforts and open up the questions to Dr. Ramanathan. While we're waiting for some questions, I'll take the opportunity to ask you a question about the trust in science and really the situation that really is the nexus between religion and politics and science. How do you think we change the conversation so that we're really dealing with clean air, clean water is a right for everyone? It shouldn't be a political discussion. It should be a human rights discussion. How do we get the team together? Because it really has to come from all the different perspectives. So what's your take on that?
So that's just a fantastic question. I think you already answered half of the thing. So first, let me preface what you asked by asking, why have we not solved this problem? Particularly, let's talk about Americans, okay? Without sounding arrogant about this, some of the major aspect of the science was done in America. It is American science. And we have the technology. So why are we not solving the problem? My diagnosis is that the public at large are not convinced. Even those who think climate change is a real problem, we are causing it. They're not persuaded by the urgency of it. Okay, and the issue is that, as we all know, America has gotten divided. So I think of two Americas, just like see the whole world as two worlds, top 1 billion, bottom 3 billion. There are two Americas in two separate tents. Okay, so there is this so-called Democrat and liberal, and then there is this Republicans and conservative Americas. And there are a number of issues which divide us. Unfortunately, climate change has put into that issues which divide us. Okay, so climate change belongs in the tent to the left. So this is where I think religion has a key power. We need to unpack science from all the issues that divide us. Okay, so we need a communication strategy such that the two camps, people can live in their two camps, but we need to persuade them climate change has nothing to do with the issues that separate you. Climate change is a human tragedy. Whether you are in the left or in the right, you all believe in spirituality or you believe in a God. And we are destroying that creation. Okay? And we are not just destroying it for ourselves. We are destroying it for the poor and vulnerable who have no defense mechanism. Okay? So that is what I decided. I did not think about these two camps till in the Vatican meeting, I called for a lunch because the president of the Evangelical Association, Reverend Leith Anderson, I invited him, he came. I think it's the first time an evangelical leader was in a Catholic church. And we were sitting here, about 10 of us, including Governor Jerry Brown. And the head of the Evangelical Network, Mitch Hescox, who was there, he told me, Ram, don't try to get us into your camp. I want to stay in my camp, but tell me how I can educate my people. So that's the issue, I think. We don't want to tell the Republicans become Democrat and solve climate change. We want to tell the Republicans, be Republican, but help us solve climate change. Sorry for the long-winded answer. Yeah.
Well, so we have one of the questions that came through, and the person's video is not working, so I'm going to ask. So you ask how we can trust science. So how can religious people trust the scientists? If the scientists are going to trust that perspective, how do we flip that around? How do we get the religious leaders to trust the objectivity of the science for what it is?
That needs a social scientist, psychologist, political science to answer that. But let me just share you my experience. I've given talks in churches. I've been in a room with all evangelicals, talk to them. And there's certain places like Nebraska, in Minnesota, Pennsylvania, etc. What I found at the end of my talk, I'll always insist on meeting some people in a small group. Universally, the response I got from them was, oh, Dr. Ram, we didn't realize there was so much science behind this. Okay. And I asked them, where did they get the information? It's very interesting. It's not in any place. We all read. So I think people like us, Michel, I hope you don't get angry with me. I'm going to put you in the same camp I am in the same time. We are all in an echo chamber talking amongst ourselves.
Too often.
And I find that those who have difficulty with climate change are still listening. And you see, I think they listen if you're humble about the science. If I go and tell them, I know everything that's happening, believe me. No, I talk to them about how much we don't know. And I tell them that's the reason we need to take actions. Things could be a lot worse because nature is so complex, right? And I think if you're open with them, frank with them, I think the message goes across.
I will agree with you. I've had the same situation where we find common ground that's not 47 graphs of science to get the story across, but really what affects them directly is much more powerful as a conversation. Anybody else have a question to send either through the chat? I'm sure there were some things that should have raised your interest, made you happy, hopefully, found a solution. Must have been overwhelming then. I'm going to ask you a question while people think, because I think you brought something up, which is your goal to teach 1 million people about climate change. And of course, that's something we do a lot at USD. What do you think we should do as a university to expand the reach of who we teach? Because it's really easy to teach some of this to the scientists, but how do we make sure that regardless of your major and regardless of your interest, that you should know something about that? What's your way of doing that?
Michel, again, these are terrific questions. I normally say that I forgot to mention it today. I think academics and academic institutions, we have a large role to play. Okay, so it's no more climate change. There's no more a problem of science and technology and all that. It's become a problem of how we evolve as human beings. How do we live sustainably? And so we need to have education program to take it to the public at large. I think, it's not going to, everyone is so busy, right? So academic institutions have to give credit to their faculty. When they career promotion, we normally look at their publications, how many courses they taught. Maybe we give about 5-10% time for service to the community. All right?
That's great. I have a question from Andy. Andy, you want to ask your question, Andy Allen? I think it's a phenomenal question for Dr. Ramanathan.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. My question was kind of related to what Michel just brought up. And what do you think our students should do first in terms of how they prioritize these issues around climate and social justice?
Yeah, I think if you ask me what's the silver lining there, I see, since I worked in this for 50 years, all I see is dark clouds. But the silver lining is the youth movement. There's the Friday for Earth started by Sweden, and then there's a number of American movements. So students have a huge role to play. They are passionate, and they don't take no for an answer. So, but the key thing I found is that not to paralyze them with, it's too much doom and gloom. So we have to mix the doom and gloom with hope for solutions. And if institutions like in the University of San Diego or UCSD, you pay attention and have an education program to educate students and have them part of your program to bring the society around you to take climate actions. So I see them as, you can call them climate champions or climate warriors. But the students now are the ones who are going to face the brunt of this crisis. 10 years from now, they're all rolling up theirs to get to the job. And I'm saying that's when it's going to go in, climate change is going to enter into your living room. So we need to prepare them to deal with the catastrophe. But we also need to prepare them to take actions. And I think I tell everyone, at the end of these talks, people ask me, Ram, tell me what I can do. I said, if you can do 2 or 3 things, of course, change the light bulbs and cut your carbon emissions. But if you're busy, you can do only one thing. Use the social media to communicate the imminence and the crisis nature of climate change.
So let me follow up on that with a question from a student, and she's on her phone, so she would ask me, she would like me to ask the question for her. When talking about climate change, do you refer to it as an emergency? Do you think that this language is an effective way of engaging people into climate action or climate concern? Is that word, a crisis, an emergency, a language that works for most people?
I certainly use them. But I think before I start using these kind of words, I take about 5 minutes to tell them about the science, just like I did with you today. So that you need to reassure them, because it's become politicized, that the science of it has been around. We know this, we predicted this, right? And then I don't mix words at all. I tell them it's a crisis stage. It could become a catastrophe, and we need to take actions now.
There's a question here that asks, how does population growth impact climate change?
Yeah, I'm asked this question, particularly since I'm working with the Catholic Church. And to me, the issue is not yet population. It is overconsumption, right? For example, this 1 billion people, I'm part of that 1 billion. We put out 60% of the total pollution. The poorest 3 billion, their contribution is only 5%, okay? So I'm not saying that population growth is good, not at all, because population growth has problems in terms of destroying habitat, species extinction. But I don't want to lose my focus on climate change. Climate change is an issue of overconsumption, right? And few of us running out the resource, and not only for the other 6 billion, but for generations to come, right? So we need to, fortunately, the solution here is switching the fuel, right? We go from fossil fuel to solar. And if someone is driving a SUV with solar, at least he or she is not impacting climate. They're impacting other things. So if you narrow the question to just to climate change, to me, the real problem is few of us putting out more than half the pollution.
Oh, I have another question that was sent to me, and that may be the last one, and we'll close for the evening so people can leave on time. And it's a question related back to what should we prioritize when we're teaching the next generation and working with them? Should we focus on the science, the impacts of climate change as we talk about sustainability, or should we focus more on operations, things we should do, how to do carbon capture, the technology side of things?
Michel, that's what we thought about it. That's why we developed this Bending the Curve course. In 1 quarter, we cover all the multi-dimensions of the thing. Just one lecture out of the 16 lectures is on the science. Talk about the science, we talk about the impacts, and then one lecture is on the impacts. The rest of the 16 is on solutions, social justice, and what kind of governance we need, why do we need international cooperation. We have 2 lectures on religion, one from Catherine Hayhoe, she's an evangelical, she's well known. And then we talk about technologies, and then we talk about ecosystem management. Remember, if you're nice to the soil and treat it nice, soil nice, it can take 2 billion tons of carbon every year. Okay, imagine just throwing some rock salt powder and not fertilizing it to the point that the soil loses everything. So there are a number of solutions. So we empower them with all of this. So I think it can be done. It's now taught in 10 campuses. Stockholm University is teaching it. Now I'm trying to take it to the so-called red states, to Texas, Kansas, Iowa. And it can be done, but Michel, it can't be done by one faculty. It took 23 of us, taping the lectures to give the multidimensional part. So that's what I would recommend. I don't think you need to spend a full quarter diving into the climate change science, unless they want to do research in it.
Well, we're doing some of this on campus, and you'll hear more about this as we go through the series. I have a question that's not about climate change at all. The question is, how is it working with Pope Francis? How is he, as a person, working in this space?
I don't know it in person. I'll tell you why, because the last time I went to Vatican was in February. I landed in this country 2 days later. All travel was banned. Otherwise, I would have been permanently stuck in the Vatican. No, I wouldn't say stuck. I would have been in the Vatican for a full year and a half. So, but I can tell you, Pope Francis is starting a major effort towards this COP26, which is the next summit coming up in Scotland, Glasgow, in November. So he has started this program called Faith in Climate Solutions Effort. And it's being organized by UK and Italy. So they're having every 2-3 weeks meetings and then developing program and culminating it in a big meeting in October. I'm hoping I can go to that. So the Pope is going gung-ho on climate change. My feeling is, I'm just speculating, seeing how in 1 year the whole world could be paralyzed. He probably feels climate change could do a lot more damage than that, because we have worked with him, talked to him about climate change issues. So I think if anything, COVID has made him even more active on doing something about the climate change problem.
I want to thank you once again. I think this was a beautiful way to start our series, and I think you framed what's going on and what we need to do perfectly. I'm going to turn it over to, so thank you again for being here. Thank you to our audience. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Peters, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what's coming up in the next few weeks.
Thanks, Michel, and thanks, Professor Ramanathan. I just wanted to say I was really moved and touched with how you started talking about our profound interconnectedness, and that we have to live on this planet with a spiritual devotion, love, and admiration for all of creation. I think that really speaks to the spirit of solidarity that we're trying to foster in our students here at the University of San Diego, many of whom I hope will join that million climate change champions. I'm sure some are on the call today. And so we're, Ram, you should know we're going to continue this conversation. And like Michel said, you're the perfect kickoff for that. We're going to actually dive into each chapter of the encyclical, as rich as it is, and you know how rich it is from your time crafting it, Ram. So our next one will be next week, and for the next 7 sessions at beginning at 5:30, same time. I think some of you have already registered for it, but if you haven't, please tell your friends about this. It's open, just like Laudato Si, the letter was open to all. These are open to all as well through the magic of Zoom. So we'll be digging in with our very own Michel Boudrias, talking about what is happening to our common home. So expanding a little bit on what you introduced to us today, Ram, and then Michael Leva-Collier will be our moderator for that session. So we warmly welcome you to join us for that. And once again, we're just really encouraged and hopeful to have someone like you on the front lines and continuing to lead us in this societal transformation we need.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. I think it's been a wonderful start. I think it shows that it really does require everyone's effort to make this happen. We need the scientists, the religious, the politics, the people, the young and the old. It's truly an earth effort to make this better. And I think we're on the right track. I also have optimism. I just tell my students every day, they're the ones that are going to be part of the army that's going to make this happen. So I have a lot of optimism that we will move forward.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.